Do not question my judgment. I thought it was important that the Prime Minister tells this House first, rather than somewhere else.
What if one quiet decision made behind closed doors was enough to shake British democracy to its core? Tonight, Westminster is not just divided and it is on the brink. MPs are turning on their own Prime Minister, markets are reacting, voters are furious, and the question echoing through the corridors of power is chillingly simple. Was Brexit just quietly undone without the country's consent? Because in the last few hours, leaked documents, secret negotiations and a rebellion inside Labour itself have triggered what some are already calling the most dangerous political crisis of a generation. This is not a routine vote. This is not political theatre. This is a moment that could end a premiership and rewrite Britain's future. Stay with us, because what happens next may change the course of the United Kingdom forever. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. If you care about what's really happening in British politics behind the headlines, beyond the spin, then please take just 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the Britain Daily. It's completely free and it helps us keep bringing you the hard-hitting stories that matter. Westminster is in turmoil tonight. What began as a routine political announcement has exploded into a full-scale crisis, one that now threatens the survival of a Prime Minister and the stability of British politics itself. Just hours ago, the government confirmed plans to lower the voting age across the United Kingdom. For the first time in a general election, 16 and 17-year-olds will be allowed to cast their ballots. Ministers say the move is about modernising democracy for the 21st century. Supporters claim it will energise young people and strengthen civic engagement. But critics see something very different. They see desperation, they see manipulation, and they see a government already losing its grip. Because this announcement did not land in a vacuum. It arrived at the exact moment Westminster was already teetering on the edge. And what followed has pushed the political system into chaos. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere inside Parliament has turned toxic. MPs are openly defying party lines. Senior figures are holding emergency meetings and the corridors of power are filled with one question. What was the Prime Minister thinking? Within minutes of the announcement, attention shifted from the policy itself to what it might represent. Opponents argue that lowering the voting age is not about democratic renewal, but about reshaping the electorate at a time when public confidence in the government is collapsing. And then came the real shock. As MPs began digesting leaked documents circulating privately across Westminster, a far more explosive issue came into focus, though secret negotiations with the European Union that appear to reverse key elements of Brexit. According to those documents, discussions had been taking place quietly for months. Talks that included regulatory alignment with Brussels, talks that explored youth mobility schemes, talks that hinted at renewed financial contributions in exchange for market access. None of this had been publicly declared. None of it had been debated in Parliament. And crucially, none of it had been put to the voters. For many MPs, and especially those representing constituencies that voted strongly for Brexit, this was not just a policy disagreement, it was a betrayal. Anger spread rapidly across the Commons. Conservative outrage was expected. But what stunned Westminster was the reaction from within Labour itself. Dozens of Labour MPs, many from red wall seats, felt blindsided. They had defended their leader on doorsteps. They had reassured voters that the Brexit result would be respected. Now they were reading documents suggesting the opposite. By late afternoon, the situation escalated dramatically. Senior MPs from multiple parties moved to trigger a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister, a move so serious, so rare, that it instantly transformed political tension into an existential threat. This was no longer about voter ID, registration systems or electoral reform. This was about trust between a leader and Parliament. Trust between government and voters, and trust in whether democratic decisions still mean anything at all. As night falls over Westminster, the Prime Minister faces the gravest challenge of his career. His authority is under siege. His party is fractured, and the country is watching as the foundations of his leadership begin to crack. Because if this government really has been rewriting Britain's future behind closed doors, the consequences will be far bigger than a single vote, and this crisis is only just beginning. By the time evening settled over Westminster, the situation had spiralled beyond damage control. Inside number 10, the mood was described by aides as explosive. The Prime Minister was no longer managing a policy backlash. He was facing open revolt. MPs who had stood loyally behind him for years were now questioning whether his leadership was salvageable at all. This was not a routine disagreement, it was a full-scale rebellion. The leaked documents had spread like wildfire through Parliament. Screenshots, briefing notes, timelines of meetings with European officials. Every page deepened the sense that something fundamental had been concealed. And for many MPs, concealment was the unforgivable sin. Several Labour members representing Leave voting constituencies found themselves in an impossible position. Constituents were already calling their offices demanding answers. Social media was ablaze with accusations of betrayal. The message from voters was blunt. You promised Brexit was settled. You promised transparency. Were you lying or were you kept in the dark? For the first time since taking office, the Prime Minister's inner circle began to fracture publicly. Cabinet ministers avoided the cameras. Some refused to issue statements at all. Others quietly briefed journalists that they had not been informed of the EU discussions. Trust, the most valuable currency in politics, was evaporating by the hour. As the crisis deepened, parliamentary business ground to a halt. Legislation on health, education and economic reform was sidelined. Committees were suspended. Civil servants waited for direction that never came. The machinery of government stalled as Westminster became consumed by one question: will he survive the vote? Opposition parties wasted no time exploiting the chaos. Conservatives framed the scandal as proof that Labour could never be trusted on Brexit. Reform UK mobilised supporters, accusing the government of trying to reverse the referendum through the back door. Even the Liberal Democrats, traditionally supportive of closer EU ties, criticised the secrecy, warning that rebuilding trust required honesty, not hidden negotiations. The financial markets noticed too. As uncertainty intensified, the pound slipped. Analysts warned that prolonged instability could damage investment and stall growth. Business leaders called for clarity, fearing that Britain was once again drifting into political paralysis. Behind closed doors, the Prime Minister's team scrambled to count votes. Phone calls went unanswered. Meetings ended without commitment. Some MPs reportedly refused to even take his calls, signalling just how deep the anger had become. Late in the evening, the no confidence motion was formally scheduled. The clock was now ticking. If the Prime Minister lost, his leadership would end immediately. A successor would need to be chosen. A general election could follow. And Britain would once again be thrown into political uncertainty with profound consequences at home and abroad. Even if he somehow survived, the damage might already be irreversible. Allies privately admitted that authority, once lost, is rarely regained. Surviving a vote does not mean surviving the fallout. Across the country, households watched events unfold with disbelief for voters already exhausted by years of upheaval. This crisis felt like confirmation that Westminster had learned nothing, that decisions were still being made without consent, that promises still dissolved when power was secured. And as the night stretched on, one truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer just a leadership crisis. It was a crisis of democratic trust. And the final reckoning was approaching fast. As night deepened over Westminster, the sense of inevitability became impossible to escape. This was no longer about leaked documents or political manoeuvring. It was about survival. Whips moved urgently through the Commons corridors, counting numbers, recalculating loyalties, and quietly admitting what many already suspected. The vote was dangerously close. MPs who had once been reliable were now wavering. Some demanded public assurances, others wanted resignations. A few simply wanted distance, sensing the political ground shifting beneath their feet. For the Prime Minister, isolation set in. Once viewed as disciplined and methodical, he was now portrayed by critics as secretive and reckless. Allies who once praised his caution were openly questioning his judgment. Opponents argued this crisis exposed a deeper disconnect between the government and the electorate, a leadership that mistook silence for consent. Even if the vote was survived, many asked whether authority could ever be restored. Across Britain, the reaction was visceral. Phone-ins filled with anger, comment sections overflowed with disbelief. Voters from all sides expressed the same frustration. How could something so fundamental happen without us knowing? The issue cut across party lines. This was not left versus right. It was trust versus power. Regional tensions intensified. In Scotland, the crisis reignited arguments that Westminster could not be trusted with constitutional decisions. In Northern Ireland, concerns grew about further instability. In Wales, calls for greater autonomy resurfaced. What began as a leadership crisis was now threatening the cohesion of the United Kingdom itself. Internationally, the damage was already visible. Allies questioned Britain's reliability. Diplomats spoke cautiously. Investors hesitated. Economists warned that prolonged uncertainty could tip a fragile economy toward recession. Confidence, political and economic, so it was draining away in real time. As dawn approached, speculation turned to what would happen next. A defeat would end a premiership. Instantly, a leadership contest would follow. The possibility of a general election loomed. Britain could be heading back to the polls sooner than anyone expected, not because of public demand, but because of political miscalculation. Yet even survival carried a heavy price. A leader who wins but loses trust governs on borrowed time. Every decision becomes contested, every policy questioned, every promise scrutinised. The authority of office, once fractured, rarely heals completely. And beneath it all lay the deeper issue: democratic consent. For millions of voters, Brexit represented a settled decision. The perception that it was being quietly unravelled without mandate struck at the heart of public faith in politics. Not just in one party, but in the system itself. As Westminster prepared for what many described as one of the most dramatic parliamentary confrontations in modern history, the country waited, holding its breath, watching, wondering whether this moment would be remembered as a turning point, when secrecy collided with accountability and power finally met consequence. Because by the time the final votes are counted, one truth will be clear: this is not just about one leader. It is about who truly decides Britain's future, Parliament or the people. And that question is far from settled.